Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, quite a long episode covering many topics. So to start things off, my sister and I continue to discuss Barry, Season 3, Episode 3, and in much greater detail than we have on some of the previous episodes. This was a really entertaining episode for me, so I wanted to break it down in a little more detail. We follow that up, continuing to watch Shining Girls on Apple+. I don't think many people are watching this show, by the way. But if you are an Elizabeth Moss fan, I do recommend this show, at least so far. I find the mystery very interesting, and I do have a slight concern as to whether this will be a satisfying finale, so maybe you hold off until then. But I have been enjoying it up until now. It's very moody, stylish, and well acted. And I'm still on board with it, as is my sister. Although we were very confused by this week's episode. If you've been confused by this show, maybe we can give you some insight here. I have my own theory that I go into great detail in this episode. And then towards the end of the episode, Nick is back to discuss first Moon Knight, then Better Call Saul, and then Ozark, the finale of Ozark in that order. So spoiler warnings across the board. We will be spoiling only the third episode of Barry, so make sure you've caught up on it before you listen to this conversation. Up until the fifth episode of Shining Girls, and in my conversation with Nick, we spoil the finale of Moon Knight, which has wrapped up recently if you haven't caught up yet. The latest episode of Better Call Saul, episode 5, and of course the finale of Ozark. Not a big fan, spoilers ahead for my reaction. Not a big fan of Ozark, especially in this final season, but you can hear my reaction there. And here's your timestamps if you want to jump to specific segments of the conversation. The Barry conversation starts at around minute 5, Shining Girls at about minute 30, and my conversation with Nick discussing first Moon Knight, then Better Call Saul, and then Ozark begins at minute 58. So I hope you find something in there that you enjoy. Make sure you recommend this to your friends and family if anybody else is watching any of these shows and may enjoy the conversation. And as usual, subscribe if you would like to get notifications when our latest episodes become available. On Monday, of course, continuing to cover Saul. We are just 2 episodes away from the break in this final season. And later in the week, a continuing conversation of where we're at with Shining Girls, with Barry, and also my review of the new Alex Garland film, Men, which is coming out this upcoming weekend, and very much looking forward to that film. I haven't loved everything Alex Garland has made, but I've always been very intrigued by it, and that includes Ex Machina, Annihilation, and the Hulu series Devs, which I recommend all of those things to greater or lesser degree, depending on the actual project. He's always interesting, and he always has very big ideas in his films, and I do look forward to that. So I hope you find something in our conversation that you enjoy, or tune in next week for more conversations. Talk to you soon. I had a recommendation for everybody and for you. I think you might enjoy this. Since everybody who's watching Shining Girls, I assume, has an Apple TV Plus subscription, there is a show on Apple TV called Calls, C-A-L-L-S, Calls. Kind of an interesting companion piece to Shining Girls in that it has a science fiction element to it and a horror element to it also. Fede Alvarez wrote and directed this show, although I think it was an adaptation of a European show, and has an incredible cast of famous people in it, but it's just their voices. So you can literally watch this thing as a podcast. You can just start playing it, and all the episodes are about 15 minutes long. The whole entire thing is just over 2 hours. You can watch the entire season, and it's like an anthology. There's something happening, something strange is happening. People are basically getting phone calls from themselves or someone they know from the future. So someone's calling them on the phone, and it's sometimes they themselves are calling themselves from the future, or they are talking to some other person that they know, but in the future. The episodes have variable quality. Some of them are excellent. Some of them are just okay, but it all comes together at the end. Like there is a mystery that's being solved by these calls. And even though this is mostly just voice acting, there is a visual element to it. It's almost like this very cool screensaver that is reacting to what the story is happening in the story, and it's changing based on that. So, for example, there is one episode where these phone calls reveal a love triangle, and you see these lines pinging on the screen, and eventually it starts to form a triangle. Simple things like that. So there is a visual element to it, even though you could pretty much just listen to this as a podcast if you wanted to binge it on the way to work. There's also, if someone receives a text message, the text message is on the screen. Obviously, it's not read out loud. Occasionally, there's a text message, but the vast majority of this, binge it as a podcast. But I really enjoyed this. I thought it was like an interesting little experiment. It's like Twilight Zone. And if it just kind of left things unresolved at the end, I think would be a little unsatisfying, but they do resolve this very strange mystery by the end of this very short series. So I recommend that. And it's called Calls, Calls. So that was my recommendation. So today we're talking about the 5th episode of Shining Girls, Screamer. Not sure why it was called Screamer. And also Barry's 3rd episode, which is called Ben Mendelsohn, which is a payoff to a very funny joke in this episode. Let's start with Barry, actually. I want to start with Barry. And I'm going to tell you something that secretly, as we've been talking about the first 2 episodes of the show, I haven't been 100% vibing on Barry. Like, I've been on board to see what they're trying to do, but I just haven't been really feeling the show for those first 2 episodes. But I loved this episode so much. I kind of actually want to do like a traditional beat by beat breakdown of the script because I thought it was so good. And before we get into that, what was your general impression also?
Oh, I was so entertained. I mean, everything is funny about this one episode.
That the very first scene is this whole sequence where we see Henry Winkler's face, and he is giving an incredible performance here.
He's good in every episode. Yeah. There was so much going on in this episode. Like every plot line was addressed.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and they're tying everything back together. That's, I think, why I feel like I'm vibing with the show more. You can kind of see how all these kind of random things that have been playing out in the previous episodes are starting to coalesce into something, right? We see everybody's kind of coming back together. And you see that those first couple episodes were just kind of setting things in motion.
Well, it's in motion.
Indeed. Then they go with some great comedy here. Once again, Henry Winkler going from extremely disturbed to very comedic, but very, very deadpan, where they come in to say hello to him. And he goes, "Hey, do you recognize this is our showrunner?" And he goes, "Do you remember me? I was an intern on Murder, She Wrote, and you assaulted me." And Henry Winkler goes, "I'm going to need more information."
That is funny.
He's like, "I assaulted multiple people on that set."
Do you remember me? Murder, She Wrote? I was a PA. You attacked me?
I need more.
You threw hot tea in my face because your omelet had chives.
Was I playing a priest?
Very honored to have...
He's like very, very impulsive. Yeah. I don't even think he's despicable. I think he's just extremely impulsive. Like he's this big raw nerve of action. And that's why last week I was saying, yeah, but he was just being real because this is his impulsive nature. Like, I don't know, his frontal lobe may not be fully developed, whatever the reason is, but it's who he is.
And to do a little more meta commentary, the show itself is a commentary on Hollywood. And it's more than that, obviously, but I think it definitely is.
He was Fonzie.
Right. But I think he's definitely commenting on the culture of the 70s, because, for example, you hear just in recent years, you have The Last Tango in Paris. You hear about the story about how the lead of that film was basically sexually assaulted by Marlon Brando in shooting that scene. They're like, let's not tell her we're going to do this, right? So it's like, great. And then, of course, they put it on camera. You think about the story recently that came out about Meryl Streep getting slapped in the face by Dustin Hoffman when they're making Kramer versus Kramer, because he wanted to he wanted her to feel that emotion, right? And I feel like the Henry Winkler character is like coming from that school of filmmaking, back in the in the 70s, where it's like
we have to go back. Yeah. So like being slapped in the face so you can feel that emotion is so not as dreadful though as being raped, to see how she will react on camera. Don't tell her. Oh, but
it feels like there is this kind of culture at the time where, not That was kind of how it was. Like, think about it in the stories you hear now about the making of The Exorcist. Ellen Barkin has like permanent spinal damage from being thrown around during those scenes. The director had a loaded gun, and when he wanted people to look surprised on a camera, he would like sneak up behind them and fire the gun like behind their heads so they could get those reaction shots on camera.
That
So my
is
point
so intense.
so my point is that this is kind of the bananas culture that was there before, where the actors were just kind of like treated like crap basically by these filmmakers. And I think obviously things are so different now. But I just think that
they have like a union and everything now. The
union always existed. It was just like culturally, I think that it was more acceptable to just
awful.
to just treat people
I did not
terribly.
Know this.
Yeah. As if people are like actors can't actually act. They need to be physically attacked on camera to get emotions out of them.
Wow.
And I do think there's a commentary of that. Suchi's not a great guy. Not a great guy. I like then that we see Hank is trying to calm down his guys. They're like, oh my God, that we got, that they came and attacked our plants. Luckily, the heroin was secreted away and they didn't find it. His main henchman at this point, he says, it's the Bolivians. We have to go after the Bolivians. And Hank says, oh, good thing. I love this. He goes, good thing I had that Groupon expiring for that city tour. That's the reason that I went on that tour. But also, that he says, oh, I don't think it was the Bolivians. I think it was just some local chodes, just some local kids, pranking us with machine guns.
He knew he had to get them out of there. It's good, though, that he had a Groupon for his plan.
Just think it's very funny that's the excuse he gave. He's like, hey, let's go on a city tour while our whole place gets shot up with machine guns. I also like that he's supposed to convince these people that, the fact that people showed up with automatic weapons, it was just some local kids pulling a prank. I'm like, I don't think they have that kind of that kind of artillery.
Maybe in The Wire or something.
Right. Then we see Fuchs is loving his Heidi life up in the mountains. He's there just to be their patsy when they need like basically someone to take a fall for something bad. But he rejects it. He says, nope, no, thank you. I love being up here. The Chechens, meanwhile, want to kill Cristobal, as you would expect. They think Cristobal's behind this. Of course, we know better. The next scene is we see Sally is preparing for her to do her interviews, worried that she's going to have to answer all these tough questions. And she's never done one of these press junkets. Everybody gets like 30 seconds. They get their soundbite. They all ask her exactly the same question. And then they're on to the next. And this is very funny. This is when they ask her like the totally unrelated question, who should be the next Spider-Man? And she says, I don't know, Ben Mendelsohn. Ben Mendelsohn's like 50 years old. It's very funny. He's a very good actor though. Very good actor though.
It's just everything they say is just, completely superfluous. Like nothing really matters when they talk to each other. They back out of things they originally said, or they say stuff to make you feel better.
Right.
Like it's just all fluff.
Oh, do you think they're going to ask about my childhood? Shit, I hope they don't ask about Sam. But I'm sure they've done their research.
Oh, do you want some Vaseline for your teeth?
Alexis Kaplan has a daughter on Pam and in real life. I don't have one in real life. Is that bad? You think they're going to call me inauthentic? Should I say that I'm considering adoption?
No, I think they'll see how authentic your passion for the show is. Just don't be too passionate, You don't want to be the real you in the wrong way.
By the way, I love this romper. It says, I'm a woman, but don't treat me like one. That's what we were going for. Oh my God!
That's the other, I think, satire on that kind of acting life, where whether you're an actor coaching another actor, or whether you're the manager trying to, get your spirits up of your colleague or your client, it's all like, just like you said, it's just like all puffery, right? It's just like, building you up and chatting you up and nothing of it means nothing's consequential at all. And the interviews are more an extension of that, right? It's just more of the same.
The scene after that is really good because Gene is that his name? Yeah. He feels so bad about his woman's death because he thinks it's his fault. Because he invited Barry to his cabin.
Yes.
And then they had this conversation that he initiated and she figured it out. Now she's dead.
I might go over to the Wheel of Fortune building, take some pictures.
Did she suffer? But she figured out that it was you she was looking for. And I invited you to my cabin. Who was that guy that took me into the woods?
He's nobody. Actually, you know what? That's not true. I want to be honest with you because I think we have a good thing going here. He's a family friend. He's actually kind of like
An uncle. He got you into this line of work. So that monologue that you gave me when I first met you, that was fucking true. And then I said it again at the dinner table. And she knew it was you.
Hey, we don't need to rehash all this.
If I didn't say anything, she'd be alive today.
Oh, no, don't put that on yourself, Mr. Cousineau. No, she was good at her job.
That was an incredible sequence for the exact reasons you said. It's not only that he is asking him if she suffered, but then when he's playing it out, as anybody would, when you have something traumatic happen, you keep playing it out in your mind. And he now is seeing his culpability in it. It's a really great scene, and it's very sad, what he's going through right now.
These actors are really good using their faces.
Yep,
like, I don't think I would be a good actress because mainly I don't think I could do that. Their faces are so controlled.
That's always been the difference, I think, between a movie actor and a television actor. Because a TV actor, you just watch them on a little screen. Used to be little screen. Now we all have giant screens. But they used to be these little screens, and they're kind of just across the room. And usually in these kind of master shots, so they're very small, right? As opposed to be a movie star, you have to have your face projected like the size of a building, and you have to have an interesting face to look at. Like you said, 80% of what you're doing as an actor is just your face. It's not the words you're speaking, which are important, obviously, but it's just your face. And if you can't pull that off, then it's not going to work. And I think that's the difference between people who are movie actors and TV actors. That's why TV actors can't make it as movie actors, right? You blow their face up onto a giant screen and they have these very bland, uninteresting faces sometimes. And that just doesn't work, right? As opposed to some of the best actors out there, you just think of their faces. You just think about the scenes where they can make you feel something just with an expression, right?
It's riveting.
If your face is going to be that big, it better be an interesting face. Doesn't have to be a beautiful face, by the way. It has to be an interesting face.
Oh, definitely interesting is much better than just pretty.
Yeah.
Pretty's good for like lipstick commercials and stuff.
So the Bolivians, simultaneously, we see the Chechens are looking for vengeance, and the Bolivians are also saying, we're going to head back to those tents. This is very funny that the Cristobal and Hank have this like very weird paralleling going on, because they both seem to have like idiots around them. Although I'm not sure if this Bolivian guy, Fernando, I'm not sure if Fernando is really this dumb or he's just playing along with Cristobal right now. What was your read on that?
I think he's really dumb.
You think so?
I do.
I wouldn't be surprised. There's some pretty stupid people on the show.
I see what you're saying. Like, he looks like he might be wise in his face, and nobody could be this dumb making these terrible decisions.
I mean, just on its face, when you see that Cristobal is saying, hey, let's not go after the Chechens. I know what's going on here. I've been here, and I'm telling you, this whole thing's a lost cause. There's really no reason to do it. And, Fernando's like, but what am I going to tell the guys? They were so excited to go and kill the Chechens. And they're like, well, I know. We'll take them to Johnny Rockets and then we'll break the news in the parking lot afterwards. So,
no, he's serious. Like, that is going to make everything better. These guys are going to be fine with it.
I mean, that's one read of it. I think potentially that
he's being sarcastic.
That Fernando knows what's going on. He's basically testing Cristobal to see how he reacts. And Cristobal is like now kind of putting the kibosh on this.
That would be so much better than if he was just dumb.
Yeah, I
would like that.
Yeah, I actually suspect that is the case, but I'm very much on the fence on this, because there have been some very dumb things, like the other Chechens in general, who might be wising up finally, but they basically call out Hank on some of the stupidity that he's done in the past in this very episode.
So you are giving this job to a madman who killed most of our men at the monastery.
Yes, but don't we want a madman? I mean, Barry, he's Greek freak of assassins, okay? The monastery, he was just having a bad day.
But I wanted to get rid of Barry. And you insisted that we use Fuchs, which was bust. And now you want to stop me going after Cristobal.
Then Hank wants the henchman, this guy who's starting to get a little suspicious here. I love that he shows up he's like, what's in the box? And they're like, it's a bomb. It's beeping, by the way. And he bought it on the dark web, and they're freaking out. They just brought a bomb in a box that came in the mail. Very
on
funny.
sale.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like a discount. I had to get it now.
And they try to get the one guy who's probably the least equipped for this to do the actual bombing. And he goes, I can't do that. That's crazy. And Tank says, I know someone crazy. And that's when he makes the offer to Barry. And Barry simultaneously is getting calls from Fuchs. Fuchs is calling him at the exact same time. This whole conversation, by the way, is absolutely incredible. Fuchs, we've seen this happen multiple times now, where Fuchs is trying to manipulate Barry into like staying in the game, or don't quit him, or don't turn him in. And like all these times, Fuchs was literally stabbing Barry in the back and to his face, trying to emotionally manipulate him. And it's so crazy because as he was even trying to get Barry murdered at some points, he was still like so in this toxic relationship with him, like having to have his approval or at least his compassion. Is a really, really bizarre thing. And you see it here. He's like, he's in heaven. He's having this great time. I think they intentionally show us that earlier scene so that we really believe that he really is enjoying himself there. And then we get,
well, Barry says, where are you? And he goes, in heaven, Barry.
And then he starts asking him all these questions. And then he goes, oh, actually, Barry, I'm dying. He hears a goat. He goes, is that a goat in the background? And he goes, like maybe I'm at a zoo. I'm at a zoo with my new best friend. And he goes, I thought you said you were in the hospital. And this gets Fuchs getting caught in his own lie, gets him so frustrated. But it's such a stupid lie. Once again, Fuchs is such an incredible character. I'm at the zoo. No, I'm at the hospital lie is hilarious.
It makes no sense. You're just like, what is happening? I love it.
The next conversation is great when you have both Sally and the girl who plays her daughter kind of unpacking everything after their interview. And Sally's kind of so upset with being asked all those questions and just kind of burned out. And also saying, did they ask you the question about who'd be the next Spider-Man? And she says, oh yeah, I think I said Harry Styles or something. And she goes, oh, that would have been so much better. And then she asks, did they ask you about the Cake Boss? And she goes, is that one of the new Avengers? And the girl goes, no, that's like a reality TV show. And she goes, oh, that's so embarrassing.
The only heavy part would have been the girl saying, like, I told him Barry was great.
Mm-hmm.
They asked me because we have a show about abused women.
When you see her with Sally's friend and she mentions, she's afraid to be in the limo with Barry. And her friend's like, why? What? When they ask, when the showrunner asks you to be in the limo, you take that. And she goes, well, I'm not comfortable being around Barry. And I love her explanation to her going, oh, no, I used to be in an acting class with, this is a great actress too, by the way. She used to be on The Good Place. It's really good on there. And she says, oh, no, I was in an acting class with Barry. And yeah, he yelled at us too. And, he killed a bunch of people because when he was in the army or something, but that doesn't make him violent or anything.
Not at all.
She also says that this is maybe very telling, by the way, that she says that, oh, and he treats Sally like a queen. That's why she keeps him around, which is interesting because I do think that Sally, the dynamic in Sally's mind is that she's kind of keeping him around. Like she's like too good for him or something. And little that we know that, like very abusive boyfriends, when you kind of disappoint them, it could get very ugly very fast.
Somehow they managed to make this stuff kind of funny. It's like you're dreading something happening, but it's still kind of funny. Very good writers.
The writing here is excellent.
Really good.
There's a very funny joke here, by the way, that when they're ready to do their scene where they come in and the lawyer's name is Manatee, Mr. Manatee. And he goes, please call me Humanity.
I mean, everyone's so good in this.
Yes.
When Barry puts his hands on his shoulder, he like almost imperceptibly gets
flinches.
Revolted and moves his shoulder back. These are like subtleties that make this amazing.
Obviously, that is what's interesting about that scene. The dialogue itself is asking Barry to ask him for forgiveness. And Barry is so strange that he does not seem to get the irony of that dialogue. He just says like, oh, let's just do our lines or whatever. And of course, now Gene Cousineau has the freedom of reacting openly because he can't get murdered by him because they're in front of an audience. So it's interesting.
And a camera.
So it's interesting that he gets to react honestly because of the artifice. So that's kind of a very interesting, irony that they create there.
Mr. Manatee,
Please, call me Hugh.
Sir, my company knowingly hiked the prices of a drug that would have saved your wife's life. What I did was terrible, and I'm truly sorry.
I want you to stay away from my family. Fuck you and don't talk to me anymore, you piece of shit.
But of course, Gene is so happy that he got to smack, him in the face, and he like storms out, and then of course gets terrified and runs away because he's like, Barry's could be behind them with a gun at any moment at this point, and his family.
Did he smack him? No, he punched him, like closed fist punched him.
It might have been like an in between. It was kind of like Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars. It was a punch slap combo. And that's when we get to the scene where, you mentioned it already, but the daughter's very uncomfortable on camera talking about this abuse that she's witnessing. And then Barry, after, Gene runs off, he realizes that he's kind of can't fix this thing.
And where did Gene go? He like let Gene out of his sight.
Gene just ran away. Yeah.
He's just gone.
Yeah. And that's a good question. What do you think is going to happen now? I think he's going to leave Gene alone. He's going to tell Gene that he can't say anything, obviously. But if he keeps his mouth shut, he will leave him alone. I think that's what Barry's going to do.
I think so too, but he has to find Gene and tell him that that's going to have to happen.
Well, Gene's going to run home.
He's going to run home to his house, you think?
I think he's going to run home to his son and grandson because he thinks that they're at risk. If Barry is on the warpath right now, which I don't think he is, by the way, given the next scene, I think he knows that they're in danger. They would be in danger, right? But I don't think that's the case. So, but I think that's where he's going to go because he wants to protect them and probably wants to like go into hiding or something.
Yeah.
The whole last part of this is so incredible where, Fuchs is getting so angry at the fact that he was happy. He was actually happy. And I think once again, that's why we see that earlier in the episode. And now he's miserable because he really does believe that Barry's like over him. So once again, this is the metaphor we see, the metaphor of this like unhealthy relationship, right? You think about all these people who are like exes or something, they seem to be remarried and happy, and then things go horribly wrong because they simply cannot get over the fact that the other person is happy. Like if the other person was miserable, they would move on with their lives. But if that other person is happy, they absolutely cannot move on.
I hate seeing you like this. I'm so riled up about Barry when he's not even thinking of you.
That's exactly why I want to kill him.
You don't. Vengeance is like drinking poison hoping the other person will die.
Well, at least he'd be dead.
Aren't you happy here?
If you knew everything I did for him, all I sacrificed to give this kid a life, you'd feel different.
And then we have this great final scene where Fuchs with his girlfriend tells him this story, a true fable, a Chechen fable about this man who wants this land. So he has to have it. So he goes and kills the farmer who owns it and all the people who live there. All the people who got killed have the option to either, give into vengeance and come back as, murderous panthers, or to be accepted into heaven. And this one little boy says, no, I don't want vengeance. And he goes into heaven. Everybody else, they get their vengeance. They kill the the guy who killed the farmer in the first place, who now owns the land. But they all die and like their souls are, at the bottom of the sea. And Fuchs totally misses the point of this. And she's basically telling him, don't be that guy. Don't be the guy who goes and pillages the farm because you're going to, in the end, your soul will burn in hell. And he's like going like, he sees himself as I'm the Panther. And by the way, I think I know all of the other people that Barry has wronged, and I'm going to create an army of Panthers to go after Barry. Right. And,
yeah.
And he knows where all the bodies are buried, but he literally knows like he's the one who has all the receipts for all of these other kills. So he could just pick up the phone and start saying, hey, I know the guy who killed your wife. Hey, I know the guy who killed your business partner. I know the guy who killed your husband, whatever. And of course, he may very well call up Gene. Gene could be part of these vengeful Panther pack. Misreads that absolutely completely.
You say this happened to a friend of yours?
It's a fable from the 16th century.
How long did it take him?
How long did what take him?
The Vengeance Army Panther thing. How long did it take him to put that together?
It didn't really happen. It's a morality story. It's not real.
But it could be.
That would be fun. What a fun episode if everybody just kind of kills each other off or something, even though it's pretty basic ending to something with this kind of theme.
Right.
I still think it would be fun.
So with that out of the way, we can move over to Shining Girls, the 5th episode. Beyond that, let's get into Shining Girls. The episode is called Screamer. Do you have any idea why this thing's called Screamer, by the way?
No, I don't know why, but I do have a lot of questions about this
Yes,
episode.
many questions.
More
yes.
than I had ever before this
Yes.
episode.
So Elizabeth Moss directed this episode. How did you think she did? Some of the confusion in the storyline, I don't think really blame her for that. Although I do think they're starting to reveal this mystery, and it's a little confusing, right? To say the least.
A couple of things happened that I find that other people might see it, where people are acting ways that are not logical.
Like what's the example?
Like the lady who lost her key goes back and she realizes someone is following her into the building like 25 minutes later.
Right.
I would be so creeped out by Elizabeth Moss if this were the case. I would not want to speak to her ever again. I would be so freaked out that this woman, I let her into my house and she's telling me that this is a key from 20 years ago. And do you see things changing and no one else notices them except you? And then I go to my job and I realize someone's stalking me with this key from 20 years ago. And then she goes and she's talking to Elizabeth Moss. Like,
Yep.
I would be like, get away from me, woman.
There's something important there is that you're seeing her in two different timelines, right? So you have the one scene where she talks to Elizabeth Moss, is asking her these questions, and she's like very interested in her, like as a physicist, and she doesn't see this as a direct threat to herself. And then you have the other one where she's kind of freaked out because she's already had some kind of creepy stuff happen. So we're seeing her in two different timelines. So I do agree that is pretty confusing, by the way. I totally agree that is a little confusing because it makes you think, you have that conversation with her, and then 2 scenes later, she shows up at her house and it's as if she's never spoken to her before. Like, why are you talking to me? And so I'm like, what is happening? And it's because you're literally seeing her in 2 different timelines. Although the suspicious one, the one who's the more suspicious version of herself, is in the timeline of the day she's supposed to get murdered, and yet she does not get murdered. We're jumping all the way to the end here, but we're still not in the right timeline, the one where she gets murdered yet. Anyway, long story short is I agree. I'm confused by a lot of what's happening here.
And before I even get into Leo, which was fascinating,
yes,
that character, that whole play out, I'm like, ooh, I was like, what is happening?
Yes, right.
There's like other weird stuff that you mentioned the other day. Everyone's timeline is a little off.
Yes. Yeah, you see that other people are getting sucked into this alternate timeline, which is part of the reason I wanted to recommend that Call show, because it plays on some of these same themes.
Her husband is still interesting to me. She doesn't even remember marrying him. He just was there one day.
Right.
A fully formed relationship. Fully formed to the point where you would agree to spend the rest of your life with this man, and she doesn't remember even marrying him.
Things change for me just like that, and nobody knows any different. And then it happens again. And again.
Have you talked to Marcus about this?
That's what I'm telling you. I never married him. I just came home one day and he was there.
Well, I mean, that's what's crazy about it, right? Is because imagine she simply is put into the body of the person who was there. That person who made the decision to marry her husband, she doesn't have her memories. She's just inside of her body. So, for example, in one version, she lives with her mom, and her mom is like a total hippie. In another version, her mom gave up the rock and roll life like decades ago and is like working at a like a kind of one of these Christian communes or something, so it's like, the very, very different situation. And of course she has no memories of her mom changing her life course because she's just literally plopped into this alternate reality. She doesn't get the memories. In other words, she's floating between these things. Like she has a cat in the beginning of the first episode, and then she gets home and there's something banging on the door, and it's a dog. She doesn't have a memory of owning a dog. The dog is just there because she owns it. And she's not the version of herself who bought that dog, right? So she's at sea all the time.
Very weird.
Yeah. But so
who's Leo? Tell me what do you think of Leo?
Oh, I don't know. Yeah. So that's
what's going on with that guy.
Yeah, we got to start breaking this down. So first thing first, she has a clue from the attack last week. She saw his tattoo, right? The killer's tattoo, whose name we still don't know. We don't know who this guy is. Pretty interesting scene there where she is talking to the sketch artist, and the sketch artist is like, we can't really trust your description. You're a little hysterical. And she's just like furious about this whole thing, of course. But she does get a very accurate picture of him from what we see. Of course, the killer then wakes up and he is chained to his bed because he was probably violent when he was found. And of course, this is very troubling to him. He's been slashed in the face, by the way. We saw her do that last week, and that's a pretty serious scar he has now, which probably doesn't make him very happy either. And he's chained to the bed and he's freaking out for two reasons. First of all, I'm pretty sure he does not like being chained up. That's probably not. He's the one who likes being in control, obviously. And second of all, he starts saying that he has to get back to the house or else he's going to end up like Leo. So this is very, very important that he says that line of dialogue.
What house does he have to get back to?
Well, I think we see it before the credits. I think it's right before the credits or right after the credits. He seems to be, something happened to Leo. We do meet Leo in this episode. I guess we met him before, but we didn't realize that's who he was. He says that he's in the wrong time. This is actually his dialogue. He says he's in the wrong time. So maybe he's not in his correct timeline. So he's starting to have some kind of break with his reality. We see like he's seeing the blurred images and things. And we see him walking back to some house. He has the key to this house. He walks into the house. There's a very cool image here, by the way. He goes into the doorway and there's a mirror. So when he sits on the steps of inside the house, that the camera pans over so you can see another version of himself in the glass. So there's like two versions of him sitting next to each other, which I thought was pretty cool. And then he starts to calm down. So apparently he needed to go back to this house so that he wouldn't have spent too much time away from the house, which is what happened to Leo. So and then we meet Leo later, and I'm just going to put my theory out there now for just to make things a little simpler, that I think that Leo also lived in this house or previously lived in this house, and that he spent too much time away from it and he started to lose his mind. Like I think that's why he has this kind of early, they think it's early onset dementia, but potentially Leo might be really old, right? Just like, so my point is that Leo's mind might be the mind of an old man because he's been potentially doing what this guy was doing before, not murdering people, but somehow being able to transfer through different timelines for decades and decades. So on the outside, he hasn't aged, but maybe in his mind he has, right? So that's my theory. That's what I got.
And maybe she's one of them.
It would be interesting if she was one of them, but we did see her as a young girl, right? So she has been aging. So I don't know. I think they're entangled. They talk about entanglement here in this actually episode. I think that's kind of what they're hinting at, that somehow because she didn't die, her fate is somehow entangled in his moves. So maybe when he changes something, when he moves through time, he changes the present or the past, he changes something. There's the ripple effects, right? It's like the whole idea of time travel. If you go and you change something minor in the past, it has like huge consequences in the future. So
like the girl was talking about atoms.
Right. Which is very cool, by the way. I mean, I don't think this is possible at the macro level with a person, but this whole thing is one of the most fascinating things for me. Quantum entanglement is utterly fascinating. I don't think two people could be entangled, but particles can be entangled. And it's amazing because you can actually, if you have two entangled particles, you can actually change one. The other one will instantaneously change, reacting to that first particle actually that was modified. And then it's like turning a switch. So the other one goes into the opposite position, regardless of where it is in the universe. So this is not like traveling through, like if you're traveling through space, you have to abide by the limitations of being able to travel at the speed of light. This quantum entanglement is faster than the speed of light. You could actually have a particle on the whole other side of the universe, like billions and billions of light years away. And if you're entangled, a change on one side affects the other. It's really, really crazy. And Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. And it is very spooky when you think about it. It's like almost something, I mean, it's something supernatural, really, when you think about it. I guess it's not supernatural because it's explained in a, physics explains it, but it's really bizarre. They're touching on some of these mysteries of physics, although even though this is actually true, right? Like, for example, another crazy thing about physics is, believe it or not, we perceive time in only one direction, right? It's the arrow of time. We only get older, right? But that's not true. That time is just like height. It's the fourth dimension, right? You have height and you have distance and you have width, and just like a measurement, and time is just another dimension. So you could theoretically go forward or backward in time if we were able to perceive time that way. But we, as humans, cannot perceive time in that direction. So theoretically, you could imagine, like if you've ever seen the movie Arrival, which is incredible, by the way, they play with this idea. What happens if you are able to be a fourth dimensional being, which means that you can travel from any point in your lifetime. So if you're 25 years old, at any time, you could actually be 4, you could be 8, not memories, but actually traveling into your body at all those different times.
That would be so amazing.
Right? It'd be crazy, right?
I would be so wise
and that's
as
kind
like
of
a 10-year-old.
Yeah, jump back into it. But here's the crazy thing about that too, and that they play with it in Arrival as well. You wouldn't be able to change anything you did back then. That's what's different from this version of this theory in Shining
It's
Girls.
still cool though, because if that were the case, I would go on vacation all the time to like these exotic places just so I can go back there
and travel to them. Exactly. All right, so that's my huge physics digression there, but I'll send you some really cool, I'll send some YouTube videos that everybody should check out. I'll put them in the show notes also in case anybody wants to see these things. There's like, very cool videos that have tens of millions of views, by the way, so they're very popular, where they say like, the 7 craziest mysteries of physics, and spooky motion at a distance is one, and they talk about it here. Quantum entanglement is another way to say that. And theoretically, what they're hypothesizing, the physicist in this show, Ginny, I think her name is that, perhaps she is entangled with this guy. Now, like I was saying before, at the particle level, you can actually have entangled particles where you turn one on into the positive direction, the other one spins the opposite direction. So it actually does happen in physics. Now, can you do it to a whole body? I don't think so. There's way too much complexity to have all of your, particles all entangled one with the other. But who knows? I mean, I think that's what they're playing with here, the concept. And they're not the first ones to do this, by the way. The Avengers movie, by the way, that's how they travel through time in the most recent Avengers film, that big finale where they traveled back in time. So
imagine we analyze it to this degree and it's something really dumb.
It could be something really stupid.
Like, well, I mean, very lowbrow.
I actually think it's going to be something dumb in the fact that they're just throwing these words out there, entanglement, etc. But like I said, this does not actually map to actual physical concepts. They're kind of using stuff that is true at the particle level and applying it to like someone's lifetime. Not the same thing. But like I said, hey, you have your discretion. They also apparently have some kind of house that gives him some kind of healing power to keep him from drifting into the wrong timeline or something, which we don't know yet.
I wonder where this house is. I mean, we already talked about it, but how are these women connected to this house?
Yeah, and the math is interesting because you think about, when you think about these women who were killed, you see someone who got killed in 1974, Elizabeth Moss's character, Kirby, or she called herself Kirby, Sharon, was attacked in 1984, but did not die. And now it's 1992. So I'm assuming that other woman will not die until 1994. Maybe that's why he says not tonight or something to her. So I think she still has time. But there are...
He says to Leo, 19, this is the last one.
I don't know. I don't know what the 19 means either. Let's get to the Leo scene because of we probably just have to jump to it now. So it is interesting. We had seen him with Leo before. For some reason, I thought because maybe just Leo was so young, I thought he was like an orderly or something at that house. This is very confusing to me also. But it turns out he's a patient at this place. He seems much more with it when he's talking to this guy rather than when he's not. He seems to be pretty demented otherwise. Although he does kind of perk up when Elizabeth Moss's Kirby character shows up later, although she does mess with him, it's a very good scene, by the way. Speaking of subtle acting, I love when he grabs her hand and she doesn't pull away because she's trying to get him to talk. But there is just this look on her face where she's just dealing with this, like not wanting to, obviously, when you consider her past, not wanting to be touched, like by someone without permission. But she just kind of sucks it up and her face is great in that moment. But before we get there, we have this whole sequence where Leo meets with with this guy, this character, this killer.
Where did you meet her? Just out. Are you sure she saw the same thing as you? She saw something change? Oh, yeah. And you know what? I could tell it wasn't her first time either. Maybe it's her that's making a change, you know? Maybe she knows something you don't. 19. Last one.
And, Leo wants to go back to the house. He says, no, that's not our deal. That's not the deal we have. That's the mystery of it. Was Leo at the house first? And then this guy showed up. Now they've switched places. But this
I
is
thought that they were at the house together. But he won't let him back in now.
Oh, you mean at one point they were they were in the house together?
Yeah.
Perhaps. But then why wouldn't he let him back in? I don't know. I don't know what happened.
Does he blame him for something?
Also, the fact that he says that's not the deal we made. So they cut some kind of bargain to share the house or something.
Maybe he was supposed to kill him after he did something stupid. And then the deal they made is you just can't come back to the house.
I mean, maybe, but why does he keep him around? Like, I mean, if he needed to kill him, he could have just killed him. Or maybe he's just fascinated by him because he knows that that's going to be his fate someday. I don't know.
Or maybe it's like his brother or something.
It could be, but I have a feeling, my theory of the case is that this guy's much older. In other words, that this guy's been killing these women for 20 years, and he's been doing this time travel thing, whatever it is, for 20 years. And that guy's been doing it for longer. And that's why when he got displaced in time, when he ended up in the wrong timeline, it's like now he's whatever. Let's say he's been doing this for 60 years. He now is like 80 or 90 years old, which is where he gets his dementia from. But another thing I found very interesting, by the way, is that that the nurses were saying that these people keep mementos in their house, in their rooms, because it helps them remember things when they have these mementos around them. And he's been putting these mementos inside the women. So is it possible that Leo and him have switched places? Like, was he some demented guy in this ward? And then would he get younger? I don't know. I'm confused.
Yeah, but he goes to her, don't go near him.
Right. I think this guy is just killing these women because he's a sicko. I don't think he needs to kill these women. Perhaps the other guy, wasn't a murderer. He was just a time traveler of some kind. And now he knows that this guy is killing these women too.
No, I mean, that would be a terrible reason for all this to be going on. Imagine we analyze it all and it's like, no, he's just a killer. He's just crazy. Like, no, it has to be something else. I'll be so disappointed
if he's just a killer who's like using this time travel thing.
It's too simple. I mean, we're talking about
to get away with it.
What were we just talking about? It was like all about physics and stuff.
Quantum entanglement.
But nope, he's just crazy.
He's just a crazy killer.
That's
it. This is how he gets away with it. I don't know. I honestly do think that's probably the way it's going. But we will
no. I think the show is creepy, though.
I would say that I think he has an agenda that's more than that. Like he made, to your earlier point, think that he's somehow putting them on a different path or something, right? He's like correcting their paths. Like maybe, but I think that he's just a sicko.
I think they're coming full circle of some kind.
There's definitely a feeling they're coming full circle when you think about the key that was found is basically, in the first body, from 20 years in the future. So that does
like
really
a ritual because he's really annoyed that she's still alive. Like, yes. I don't think was part of the full circle plan.
Right. And then we have a very creepy scene, by the way, almost right after this, when he's inside of Ginny's apartment. He's already there. And she's, having Elizabeth Moss come up to
I love that
Kirby.
Scene.
Yeah. Kirby's coming up the stairs and he sneaks out onto the balcony because, of course, he's been there so many times in this exact instance that he knows when she's going to turn her head. He knows everything, right? So it's very creepy when you think about someone just knowing you so well that they can be in your presence, like just feet away, and you don't see them. That's a very, very creepy idea, and then he sees Kirby come in. And he's happy because Kirby kind of changes back into the version of Kirby that he likes to see when her hairs get shorter there.
I like that he mapped his way back to that scene because previous to him knowing she was still alive, he would not have been able to do that.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's a disturbance he's created here now too, because he doesn't know she's alive. And like you said, that now she's intersecting with his next victim, which of course is going to create many problems because this pattern that he's been hiding in time is all like on the front page of the newspaper right now, right? So it's pretty crazy.
How many more episodes are there?
Three more.
Yeah. See, that they are wrapping it up. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, it's getting closer to the
We're
end.
getting to the nitty gritty here.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think we're getting closer to that.
I like to say nitty gritty.
Nitty gritty. It's all about the nitty gritty. There is one more important thing that we find is that really great scene, like we mentioned already. We're kind of telling the story out of order, but so is the show, so that's okay. But we have the whole sequence where she goes to talk to Leo, and there's a great scene I mentioned where he touches her and she doesn't want to be touched, but she kind of plays along. And then she tries to use his dementia against him. And she starts saying, I'm going to tell him you told me where he lives. And he goes, what do you mean? And he's like, you just told me. And he's like, don't tell him. And it's so cool because, it's cruel in a way, but it's very cool to kind of basically use his own mistrust of what he's just done a minute before against him. And he still doesn't tell her where the house is. She wasn't able to work that out, but she does say he knows you have it or something like that. She's trying to just fish for something. And he gets a VHS tape. Another interesting clue. This girl is dressed up like someone from the 1940s, like a 1940s swimsuit. And so this girl's in relatively contemporary times, we would assume, is dressed up as this old time swimmer in this old time costume. And then the question is, I think they're going to try to track her down, basically. And but yeah, so once again, how old is this guy? Because he seems to have a tattoo that her husband identified as being related to Vietnam, but he has some nostalgia for that girl in a bathing suit that is speaking French. So was that World War II, right? Because that's when these men served in France. That's much earlier than Vietnam War, right? That's 30 years earlier.
Was that even like a real old tape? I mean, I feel like that person was play acting.
Yes.
Yeah, but it wasn't too old. It probably was like 10 years before or something.
Right. That's my guess, is that he is making a tape in contemporary times. And I think it's even later than 10 years before. Remember, this show is shot this year. The timeline that we're in is 1992. So this is shot on VHS. So it wasn't 1973 when he shot that video, because that girl, people didn't have VHS tapes back in 1973, basically. So you're looking at something in the early to mid 80s, if not later, maybe even 90s. So the point is, this girl made that video within the past few years, maybe 6 years, 7 years. So yeah, it was not an old timey video. It was shot on video. And which means that he is making her play act somebody else, basically, which is what she's doing. But it's just, why would he have a nostalgia for someone dressed up like someone from the 1940s, for example, right? Unless maybe he's that old, right? Maybe he's been around that long.
I was wondering about that whole scene. I'm like, why? What does this VHS tape or whatever it is have to do with this mystery?
Well, I think
and then there's the key,
right.
And then there's the Pegasus, and then there's Leo, and all the time shifts, and the mom being like a religious cult person or something, whatever. I don't even know what she's doing. Or she was like a alcoholic, drug addict, rock star. There are so many moving parts in this show.
Well, I think most of that, I think that the differences in people's biographies is not important. And I don't think that giving her the Pegasus is in and of itself, like the Pegasus has some kind of secret power. I think it is just another memento, like he has all these other mementos that he uses to mark these women in some way. This is my guess as to what it is. And those things mean something to him. And they are, it's like he's leaving a puzzle behind intentionally, because each murder clue leads them into not only a different victim, but that victim is in a different time frame, right? Like, for example, Kirby's matches don't exist in her version of reality, and now they do. So something has changed, right? So it's all going in some direction. And but we still don't know what that grand plan is, but there definitely is a grand plan that he's trying to some ceremony, like you said, that he's trying to concoct here. Some of the other stuff, about like, the mother's involvement in that, church, the husband, and then, the guy who she is just a friend at work, that you can kind of tell early on that he kind of has a crush on her. And now, of course, they're married in a completely different version of reality. I think that's just like time differences, right? I don't think that is, I don't think that everything's going to tie up so neatly. I forgot to mention something that happens at the very beginning of the episode, and then it circles back to it at the end. But in the middle, we feel like Dan might be losing his faith in her, right? He's, starting to believe this evidence, but then she's telling him, things are moving in time. I don't even know my husband, as the whole conversation you touched on earlier. And Dan's like, oh my God, this woman is insane. What the hell? Relying on her. And then it gets worse when later on the cops go, where'd you get that evidence from? And they're like, well, we got it from the archives, but we put everything back. And he says, well, the bags have been opened. And is it possible that all that weird evidence is because it's been tampered with? So now he's starting to think, oh my God, did Kirby actually mess up the evidence? And that's why all this weird evidence is coming up. But he comes around, right? Because at the end, there's a really cool scene where she says, where's your car? And he trusts her. He says, okay, what car did I drive here? And she describes the car he used to have. The cigarette burns, every little detail. And he starts to believe her. So that is a step in the right direction for her. He finally may have somebody on her side here.
What do you think I drove here?
A Celica. Tan. The seatbelt on my side, it was broken. Whoever sat there must have smoked. There were burns by the window.
You're right. My ex-wife didn't give a shit about that car.
Do you remember it?
Yeah. Sold it a couple of years ago. I definitely didn't drive it here. When things change for you, do you recognize it?
Sometimes. Other times they're just random.
Maybe they're what's to come.
I think he had that experience where he, had the glass in his arm and then he cut his arm the next day. And he's like, well, that's kind of weird, Dan even says it at the end of this episode, right? That when things change, maybe you're seeing things that are coming from the future are coming, right? So theoretically, maybe, you saw in the very first episode where she's kind of flirting with that guy. Maybe they flirted and dated for 5 years and then they got married, right? And then that got accelerated by some changes that happened. He doesn't have that car now, but he did have that car earlier in the day, Dan, that is, right? So that was from 2 years in the past. Well, things just moved 2 years, right? So things are moving around in time. And yeah, I don't know why. I'm just saying, I think that's what's happening. I don't know why it's happening.
We are so baffled. Like you can hear
Yes.
it in our voices. We are just like, it's baffling. The show is baffling.
But is it frustrating? I find it entertaining, even as
I
I'm
don't
baffled.
think it's frustrating, but
Yeah.
I have a lot of patience.
Yes, I do
Like
too.
I always look at the long game.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I feel about this. There's a long game somewhere in here. That's why the guy can't just be crazy.
Yep.
Like he's just crazy is not acceptable.
Well,
There's just so much thought going into this.
to the rest of it. Yes.
Yeah, for this to be like, he's just crazy. So it's funny because how do you talk about this show? We're like trying to pick it apart and stuff because we don't even know where it's going at all.
Well, I think we can't really solve it until we get to the end, unless, once again, this is a book, so we could probably get spoilers for it. But I've been trying to avoid spoilers so far since I made it this far into this show. I'm not going to spoil it now. So,
No, I avoid all spoilers
Yeah.
all the time.
Well, I mean, if you've read the book, I'm sure if anybody's watching this that read the book, I'm sure everything's been spoiled, unless they change the plot, which is possible.
No, that would be even worse.
All right. Thanks for the conversation.
All right. Bye.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye. All right. So we were just kind of working out the agenda for today before we started recording. We have Nick back on the podcast again.
Hey.
And top of the list for me, but this is probably not top of my list anymore, given how things all wrapped up. But we were covering week to week the Moon Knight show, and I was kind of on board again with episode 5 when they were in the asylum, and then not so much with the finale. So.
Yeah, we're pretty much in the same camp. I was on board again a little bit with the asylum episode. Kind of liked where it was going. Still not totally sold. And I think my reaction after the episode 5 asylum episode was, man, how are they going to wrap this thing up?
Right.
Because it sort of didn't give us too many answers. At the beginning of 6, they bring back Steven.
Right.
But I kind of like the fact that they were down to just one character, but then they brought him back, and I'm like, all right, let's see where this goes. So 5, I was intrigued, like, all right, this is good. Let's see if they can wrap it up. And I wasn't optimistic that they would be able to wrap it up.
Right.
And my my fears were confirmed somewhat with the final episode. I thought it was a mess, honestly.
Yeah.
I thought the last episode was a mess. I put this series in the Falcon and Winter Soldier series, where I really never need to see it ever again.
Right.
I actually wouldn't mind seeing this character show up at some point down the road in the MCU. And again, I haven't seen Doctor Strange yet, so I don't know if he's in it or not, but I really don't need to see his origin story anymore. To be honest with you, it's very confusing. Towards the end of the show, I was like, I didn't know what the hell was going on. I'm like, what is actually happening here? And then, it finishes. He's back at home, right? He wakes up, he's tied to the bed again. And then the third personality, who we all suspected was, I forget the name of the character, but it's the cab driver, the cab driver from New York was the character at the end. So I didn't think that was that huge of a reveal, actually, because when Khonshu was in the car with Harrow, I had a feeling, I'm like, I bet you it's going to be the third character, and sure enough, it was. And he shoots Harrow, and then that's the end. Like, what's her name became the avatar for the hippo,
right? Which her armor was the only highlight of the whole thing. Was I thought the armor was pretty cool, and the
armor was cool, and she actually was a pretty cool superhero. So I kind of like that.
She's more action oriented than the Moon Knight is, right?
The Moon Knight, and once again, I think if somebody has the patience or fortitude to go through the entire series, I'd be curious to see if they could actually sit there with a stopwatch and see how many minutes you actually saw Moon Knight on screen.
It's crazy. I also love the fact that there's some actually very cool iconography there. I love the shot when he flies for the first time in that final episode, and his cape is out, and it kind of makes that almost bat signal type symbol with the moon behind it. And it's such a cool payoff, but it's a payoff for what? We have no attachment to this character at all. We've never seen this guy do anything. It's not finally there he is, he's back again. It's what are you talking about? This is the first time we've seen him in action.
Exactly.
It's just the way the whole thing is structured is so strange.
I'll tell you though, I mean, looking at the reviews, some people, especially on Twitter, and I don't know if it's just, and again, I'm a huge MCU fan, big time. Generally speaking, I like everything that they put out, with the exception of some certain things, and this was one of them that I didn't really like. But you'd read on Twitter, people were really obsessed with the show, and they were like, "This was great. It was a great end." And I was like, "Oh, I don't see it. I just don't see it." I just feel like you could have done so much more with this character, especially with 3 split personalities, and it went a little bit off the rails with the whole asylum thing. And I still don't understand how that even fit into everything. And then at the end, Harrow's in the asylum, right? Yeah. So it's what was actually that was the most confusing part to me, because I felt like the asylum is actually in Mark/Steven's head, right? And when he got shot, that's where he goes, and then he sees I apologize, I can't remember the name of the god, but the hippo god,
right. Me neither. That's all. I knew it when I did the recap last week. It's all out of my mind. It's all gone now.
Exactly. So he's in the asylum, and I'm thinking, well, that's a manifestation of his in his mind. He's just that's what he sees when he dies, I guess, or whatever. But then in reality, Harrow's actually in that asylum at the end of the show when Khonshu gets him out, before he shoots him in the limo. Right.
I think there's 2 different asylums there. I think one is an actual asylum, but he also had checked himself into an actual asylum. That is Steven back in, when his mother died. We kind of find that out very briefly, just in one line of dialogue. So I think that that is like kind of a mind palace for him. That's all happening in his mind, but it does correlate to an actual asylum. And that's where we see Harrow at the end. But I mean, I don't think you're inside of his mind palace or whatever.
Yeah.
Or that he was that. I think I've actually heard that on Twitter, people saying like, how did this like nice version of Harrow, like in this other space? They think it's like some kind of alternate plane or something. I'm like, no, that's all in his head. He's casting Harrow in that role. And then Harrow is in an actual asylum at the end and shot. I'm not sure how he got there that quickly. Cause I mean, he's like waking up in his body in his apartment, and then somehow apparently jet set on that limo with the license plate Spectre with the missing E, a very subtle.
Yeah.
And,
it was
somehow he got there very quickly.
It didn't make much sense. But I will say, going back to episode 5, one of the things that I did like about episode 5 was the backstory and how he developed Stephen, and Stephen sort of saved him because of the harsh reality of, when he grew up and his brother died and all that. I did like that. I really did like that. And I just feel like you could have gotten rid of a lot of the stuff that happened in maybe like the first few episodes. And maybe you have the first episode, and then maybe the second episode could have been his backstory where he developed Stephen, and then just taking it from there. I feel like there was just for 6 episodes, there was so much ancillary stuff that you just didn't need to waste time on. It could have made for a more cohesive storyline that I think you would have been more interested in what happened to these characters at the end. It's a big thumbs down on my end in terms of the show. And started having my doubts midway through, came back a little bit for episode 5, but then
To your point earlier, I'm very surprised by it too. The reaction's been pretty strong, and the streaming ratings themselves and the Moon Knight ratings have been strong week over week. They've performed better than Hawkeye, not as well as WandaVision and Loki, which were massively successful, but more successful than the other shows, Hawkeye specifically, and Captain America and Winter Soldier, or is that the right way to say it?
Falcon, but
Falcon and Winter Soldier,
Captain America at the end,
right? Whatever.
At the beginning and at the end.
Who will be Captain America?
Basically. Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. I mean, and everybody I've talked to, including a good friend of mine at work, he's also very much into the MCU, and he said the same thing. He just wasn't feeling it.
I know people who just quit on it. People just quit on it.
So I don't know who's. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there watching it and they really enjoyed it, but maybe you cut some of the stuff out in the first few episodes that seemed to be a little bit redundant. Like, we get it. Like, we had 2 personalities. One of the personalities was, crazier than the other, and blah, blah, blah. I think you could have made a more cohesive storyline if you cut some of that out and maybe reordered it.
Yeah, I think the craziest thing about it is I think that this thing was misconceived from the very start, because what is there, and I think I mentioned this in the when I did the review last week, but it's like, what is there? Those actual episodes, if you cut that whole thing in half to like 2 hours, maybe it works as a movie. If you really take just that exact story, but you get rid of all the fat from it, right?
Yeah.
But as a TV show, like you said, this could be very interesting. Like, they could have taken any aspect of this, and I think it would have been more satisfying. Whether we open on his origin story, him being shot and dying and getting the Moon Knight powers, and then having this internal conflict over the course of the show, that would be a better way to tell the story. If we saw this as it's Moon Knight, he's Batman, it's already Moon Knight, he has all his powers, he already has his money and his weapons and everything else. And then we find out over the course of the show that there's a supernatural element to it, right? We get introduced to it. He's just Batman, but then, oh wait, Batman with this supernatural element to it. Cool. That is more satisfying version of the show. Or going totally abstract. Imagine he's in a mental asylum, and like in his dreams, he's the superhero. And then he's going back and forth going like, which one of these things is true?
Yeah.
And it's this battle of all these different elements of it. Maybe that's not really great for the MCU, but it's the type of thing that I would be very much into. So if they really wanted to do something experimental, they could go in that direction. This felt like none of those things. Like, I don't know what they were trying to do in this show. It really made no sense at all.
I totally agree with you. And the thing is, like, going back to the point, like, we both of us very much like Severance, right? So it's not like, we're unable to appreciate abstract sort of type of shows. I mean, Severance is as wacky as it gets, and abstract as it gets, but that was just done very, very well. And this was just done very, very poorly. One question I actually had was, could people see the 2 giant
yes, the kaiju, the giant, it's like a giant.
like it was like Godzilla against, could they see that at that point? Because
I have to assume they can, right?
So then, okay, so if they could see them then, right? Why couldn't they see Khonshu earlier when it was just Mark talking to him?
Good point.
And then the other question I had was that you have Godzilla facing the giant skeleton creature, right?
Right.
Isn't this an Avengers level threat at this point? Like,
yes.
why are we not seeing okay, I get it, Iron Man's gone, but where are the Avengers? Like, come on,
right?
You've got two gigantic gods, fighting each other. That presumably it's going to determine whether or not almost the Thanos level thing, right? Like a lot of people are going to die if Khonshu doesn't win. Where are the Avengers here?
And what are the Avengers doing? Like, it's so funny when you actually think about the actual plots of the Avengers movies, where they're like trying to get some weapons that are being smuggled out. not at the end, right? Endgame is obviously hugely high stakes, but you think of some of the other ones, and they're like, we were too busy to do this, for example, when the sky is being rewound 2,000 years. But we're going to have this fist fight in Captain America: Civil War, which I love, by the way. I absolutely love that movie. But excellent movie. That's an Avengers level event, right? Like the blowing up a plane that's grounded somewhere.
I get it. You can't have them in everything, but that was a little bit much. And again, it violated the rules that had been established earlier in the show, where nobody could see the gods other than the avatars. That wasn't the case, I guess. At the end, everybody could see Khonshu fighting the Amit, or AKA the giant crocodile.
Right. So Saul, we have 2 episodes of Saul that just came by. They're very middle episodes, right? But I think they're setting things up for next week, which I think is going to be very eventful.
I mean, this show's outstanding. I could say nothing bad about Saul. I just love where it's going. He got the secretaries now in. He's got the space. Yeah, she's like, what the hell's going on?
Toilet in the middle of the room.
Exactly, the toilet's in the middle of the room. The Nacho episode. Oh my god, that was so sad. And it's funny because you ended up rooting for the guy, and you really hoped he was going to be able to get out. I'm curious to see what happens though. With, I think her name is Marguerite, right? She was the wife of, if Lalo ends up killing her, and you don't know, he might just leave because I think he got what he needs to get. I think he found the name of the company, right?
Yes, exactly. That's my
so
guess.
He may not do anything to her, but I was actually thinking, I'm like, if he ends up killing her and Mike finds out,
right,
Mike's going to get him, because Mike, as you remember, was, I forget the husband's name, but
Warner.
Yeah. He was protective, very protective of him. And even after he had to do what he had to do to him, I was thinking, I'm like, wow, if Lalo ends up killing her, that could be how Lalo ends up going when Mike finds out. But it was interesting. So he's obviously going to track down now the other guys that worked on the project and determine what Gus was actually doing. But as we know, the lab obviously does get built. So
right, exactly.
I don't know, the end game here. I mean, what's really going to happen? The only interesting thing is, does Lalo fall off the grid?
Right.
And because you don't know for sure that he doesn't survive into the Breaking Bad timeline.
Right.
Maybe he's just hiding in Europe, or he's on the lam. Maybe he shows up in, was it Peoria or wherever Saul is? Stranger things have happened, especially with Vince Gilligan. So who knows?
To your point, I don't think that he's going to kill Marguerite. My co-host Sona said the same thing. She was like glad that he didn't kill her and that he had some sympathy for her. And I said, I agree. I actually do think you see Lalo like kind of out of his usual context. I actually do think he had sympathy for her, and he did not want to hurt her if he didn't have to. So I don't think he's like as a one-dimensional monster as he may present himself to be most of the time. So on the one hand, I think he's glad he didn't have to kill her. But on the other hand, I completely agree. That was my theory of the case, which is if she ends up dead, there's going to be alarm bells going up everywhere, right? So Lalo doesn't want them to know he's coming. So he's going to obviously not kill everybody in his way, because Mike is going to know he's on his way if all these people start turning up dead. I'm sure Mike is keeping tabs on all of these people.
It's been so long, and I haven't watched the last season in a while to sort of, I
did my research, so I can answer this for you.
I can't remember why Lalo ended up at Jimmy's apartment that night. I know it had to do with Jimmy getting the getting the money over the border, but the car got shot up, but he was helped by Mike. But I can't remember why Lalo was like interrogating him and Kim.
That was the whole thing. So he needed the money. So the original plan was he's going to get the money just drive out. They're going to meet the murder twins in the middle of the desert, get the bag, and drive back home. And then he gets intercepted. Mike is there, snipes, the guys, and then they do that whole walk back. And then Lalo goes, so how did everything go with the money? Saul says everything went fine. And it's just the fact that he, like Gus, by the way, they're kind of like mirror images of each other. There's something wrong. I know he's lying to me, and I need to know why he's lying to me. And basically that's what it came down to. So they found his car. The car was shot up in the middle of the desert. And then that's when they have the whole confrontation. So he's like telling Saul to be like, tell me again what happened. Tell me again what happened. Because he knows that Saul's lying to him, right? So that he knows that the story's not the way he said it is. And that's when Kim kind of starts covering up and saying, look, the car broke down. Someone showed up. They shot it up for fun. They shoved it into a hole. And now you are harassing us because you don't trust your own men. You need to find out which one of your men you don't trust, because why are you here talking to me if you really have all these problems? So, and then he had no response to that. So, she was fast on her feet and got him out the door. To your point, I think you're asking me this because you think like, is Saul really at risk here? I don't think Saul would be their number one target. I don't think that Lalo's going to come after Saul. He's going after Gus. I don't think he's going to come after Saul and be like, Saul lied to me about that money transfer. I think like basically he still knows that Saul lied to him about that money transfer, but that is, like Gus tried to assassinate him. This is like way past that at this point, right? So
because I was like, I couldn't remember why I knew that they were worried about him, and I knew that he had showed up at their house, but it was just, I'd gotten, before the season started, I got to like episode 3 or 4 of last season, and then I just wanted to start this, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to delay it because I knew where it ended up anyway. But I, for the life of me, I couldn't remember why they were so worried that he was going to show up again, because I thought that they had resolved it.
Supposedly this guy's dead, and now he's not dead. And the last time he was in town, he was at their house threatening to murder them. So I think they're just probably like, I don't think that they're like trying to cover up, like, we paid to have this guy assassinated. He's coming after us. I think just terrified if he's out there at all, right? Because they could get caught up in this whole thing. The reality is if he shows up and says, I don't have anyone else to do this deal for me, Saul, you're going to do it, or I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill Kim. Even if it's just something like that, like they're just pawns on the board, it's still terrifying, right? Who wants to get involved? So I think that's basically where they're at.
Yep. And I'll tell you, man, Tony Dalton's a great actor.
So
unbelievable
great.
Actor.
I went off in our review earlier this week on just how great he is in that whole final sequence. You see him be like very charming, and then you see him like asking the questions, and she really does not know. He knows that she's not lying to him. And you just see on his face as he just keeps politely asking these questions. He's so frustrated. He's like, I'm not getting anywhere here. And it's so great. You see everything happening on his face. It's really, really impressive.
It really is. And no, that was great. It was an excellent episode. Both the last 2 weeks have been great, but we'll see where this goes. Anything else? Oh, the whole thing with Howard, man, that's I was trying to figure out whether or not Jimmy knew that Howard was at the gym, or if
I don't think he knew about the gym. I think he was surprised. He was surprised by that whole encounter, but I don't think like when he shows up, Howard finding out this, minus the whole gym of situation, the Howard finding out what's going on was part of the plan.
I think so too,
because they're not surprised at all. They're not panicked or anything. They're just whatever.
when he said, no, I know what the problem is. I have a Jimmy problem, because when he's like, who did you meet for lunch? He's like, well, Kim Wexler.
The dead giveaway, right?
Yeah. It's like, okay, but it's going to be fun to see what you almost feel sorry for him, because he was such a jerk, like, through the whole show. But now it's like, oh man, I don't know what they're going to end up doing to this poor guy.
And there's something else that's going to happen too, because they need to know who the mediator is going to be. And I assume it's all going to click into place. Probably next week will be the big eventful episode. And then they'll have kind of the wrap up. And then my prediction, I think it's the same you've had in a previous conversation we had, which is we are going to jump into like Breaking Bad timeline when we come back from the break.
I mean, who knows? But I think you're going to have a jump into Breaking Bad, and then the last couple episodes have to be post Breaking Bad.
Yes,
or at least the last episode. I mean, to find out what eventually happens and who's still around and who's not. Right. The funny thing is the lead in this week. I certainly fell for it. I actually thought it was Walter.
Mm-hmm.
Making
I did too.
Making the crystal meth. I thought, I was like, oh wow. I'm like, here it's Walter, and no, I could have sworn I was like, oh wow, we're going to see Walter and Jesse right now, but no, not yet.
Here's an amazing Easter egg that I did not notice in the show, but it was something that I couldn't figure out in this week's episode. It's the moment where Gus is at Pollos Hermanos and he offers the guy, goes, "Oh, you should get with your sandwich would be our signature spicy curls," right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like his spidey sense tingles, or like my co-host said, she said it was like there was a disruption in the force, right? Like something happens, right? So something is clicking in place in his head. And what was it? And this person on Twitter figured it out. There's a sequence where we see him meeting with his board of directors, which is like this conglomerate that not only runs Pollos Hermanos, but also, of course, the drug trade as well.
Yeah.
Which is Madrigal is like the main investor there. And he introduces at the board meeting, our new spicy curls, right? So, and then everybody tastes it and they all compliment how delicious it is and everything else. So now here we are over a year later, that's season 4. So now over a year later, he brings up the spicy curls. And it's like at that moment, he realizes Lalo knows about the German connection.
Wow.
And it's like he's understanding that Lalo is in Germany all of a sudden. It's like that's how he got figured it out at that moment.
Oh, wow. That is great. That's right. That is right. Because
it's so funny that the spicy curls is the trigger in his mind.
Wow, that's impressive. Whoever remembered that. Wow, people really
people are hardcore.
I gotta give people some credit, man. You really do have to give people some credit here. But
it's just amazing how tight the writing is on that show. Speaking as contrast, because I got to talk to you about this before we wrap up, the Ozark finale. What kind of Ozark watcher are you? Are you a big fan of the show? Like, I would say a big fan. I mean, not as big as Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but Ozark's up there for me. I mean, I would put it in. It's one of my favorite shows that's ever been on. This season was a little uneven for me, but I didn't mind the ending. I was hoping Wendy would die. Spoiler. Yeah, I'm going to put spoiler on this whole thing, by the way.
Yeah.
Since we spoiled everything we talked about so far.
I was hoping Wendy would die, and I have to say I was sad to see Ruth go.
Yeah.
I was pulling for her. I was hoping that she'd be able to get out. And I actually thought Frank Jr. was going to come save her. I thought that he was going to show up and end up killing, I guess it's Camilla, right? The sister.
I would have preferred that, but at the same time, I feel like it's kind of like at least the show kind of played honest there in the fact that, first of all, I don't think anybody saw Camilla coming, really. I mean, he's never had that kind of relationship with Ruth. I guess they did bond actually in this past season or so. But I also feel like, the show, I mean, if he goes and kills Camilla now, there's a whole other, they were just at war with them just last season, right? So it's just a continuation.
I mean, it left a lot of things open, and I think they did it on purpose because now, without Ruth there, she's not going to be able to launder the money through the casino, right? Yeah. The birds are presumably they're clean now, right? Because they've got their little foundation and they'll go and do what they.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that last scene.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, Jonah. Yeah. Oh, he shot him. Definitely. There's some people think that he just shot the cookie jar. I definitely think he shot the detective / police officer. Is it Max?
With the cut to black, don't you think? I mean, obviously you hear the gunshot. I think that what we're supposed to be deciding there in that cut to black is, did he kill the detective or did he kill his parents?
I don't think he killed his parents. I mean, my feeling is I think he thought, we're out. We're finally out. And now, this asshole shows up and we're not entirely out. And then he came in, and if you saw the look that Marty gave Wendy, they almost were like proud of him. Like, look at our boy, he's got a shotgun on this guy. I think it was, I think he shot him and they got away clean, which is incredible. I didn't think that was going to happen. A little bit annoyed with the car crash. God. That annoyed the shit out of me, to be honest with you. I'm like, we waited 14 episodes for this.
Yeah. I'm on the opposite side of this thing with you. I loved season 1 of the show. I was actually one of those people who was telling everyone, you got to see this show. In the first 2 episodes, it's like the whole first season of Breaking Bad in 2 episodes. And it was just like, and I'm like, I don't know if they could keep this pace going. And I really feel like they should have slowed it down at some point, because by the end of season 1, I was so out on this show. I was completely out on it.
Really?
Yeah. I had a huge problem with, was it Darlene? Was that her name?
Yeah, Darlene. Yeah.
I just had such a
Yeah,
huge
she
problem
just
with
kept
her.
shooting everybody with
She
the
just shot everybody.
shotgun.
Anybody walks in the house, she just shot them. And somehow there's no ramifications for her. And there's no logical explanation as to how she keeps surviving. Like, first, they need her for the heroin. Then they need, then she's protected by her husband. But then she murders her husband and she's still protected somehow. But they need that heroin deal. But then they decide, you know what? We don't need your heroin. As a matter of fact, we'll burn your fields so that you don't sell it because, you're messing up our plans. And still she survives. And then she's constantly protected. And then she's being protected by the Italian mob. And then Frank shows up at her house and she murders him and she's still protected. I'm like, who is she possibly protected by at this point? They burned her opium field. She has killed every other person who supposedly protects her. And everybody's still like, well, we can't mess with her. And literally, it's such a troll of the audience because after she goes and shoots, Frank Jr.'s manhood off and kills his dad, she still is protected. And then Wendy sits there and goes if I don't call 911, she's dead. And everybody makes sure she's okay, as if everybody was bringing flowers to the hospital because Michael Myers had survived the last Halloween movie. You want this person dead? Why are you bringing her flowers? What is that? What is happening over here? The Darlene problem was a huge problem for me, but I hate watched the show. I just thought it was one bad decision after another. Right away in that first episode where they have Javi show up, they're in someone's corporate room. There are security cameras on, and they're
That's true.
Ruth, I'm tired of hearing you talk. Okay, here we go. I'm going to bring him here so you can shoot him dead in front of our business partner, this woman who's going to fund our foundation. This is one woman who can make us legitimate. And we're going to drag her into this whole entire thing. And I'm just what decisions are these people making? And like you said, and they get away with all of it. It's just it's completely, it
did go quite, it did go off the rails. I don't know. I enjoyed it. It was certainly better in the first couple of seasons, no question about it. It got a little bit off the rails there. I felt sort of the same way with Sons of Anarchy, where I really, really enjoyed it the first few seasons. And then I still liked it through to the end, but and then it ended. I enjoyed it. I don't see myself going back and watching it again, but I would still say it was one of my, favorite shows that had been on TV. But yeah, I agree. The first few seasons were much better than the end. But one of the other problems was you also ended up killing off a lot of the characters. So
right,
there was really nobody left by the end. So they, bring back the entire Langmore clan in the flashbacks or in her mind. They were all there.
Exactly.
I enjoyed it. I mean, it was just a little, the ending was just a little underwhelming. I didn't hate it. It wasn't my favorite endings, but a little I felt like though someone should have bought the farm. All four of them made it out. Especially when you think back to what happened in the first 15 minutes of the first episode ever, when Dell comes in and he shoots everybody, and Marty's begging for his life. And it's that was actually the closest Marty ever came to getting killed, I guess then when they took him to Mexico. But if you think back at it realistically, the closest Marty ever came to getting killed was in the first 15 minutes of the first episode.
You brought it up already. I find it really annoying when a show gets really cheap like that. And we see in the very first episode of this season, we have the car crash, right? And you're like, oh, we're coming back to that, right? And I had joked with Sona that's going to be the payoff at the end, right? That they get away with it, they get scot free, everything's good. They clean up they're singing Kumbaya in the car, and then they all die in a car accident, right? Which would be a cheap ending, I agree, but it still would be something at least.
Yeah.
And instead, what they do is they introduce that to keep you on the hook. We want to make sure everybody hangs in there for the second half, and then they're like, oh yeah, the car accident. We'll just throw it in there, and it's completely inconsequential.
Completely
inconsequential.
So when they get into the car after she gets out of the hospital that she was in, they get in the car, and I said to myself, I go, wait, this is it. This is the car accident.
Right.
So and then the music comes on, and and then they're having the dialogue. I actually hit pause.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, this is going to be great. I'm like, there's 45 minutes left this episode. And I'm rubbing my hands. I'm like, here we go. Finally, we're going to have the payoff. And then the car flips over and you see Marty gets out. Then the two kids get out. And I'm like, all right, Wendy's dead. At least she's dead. And then he pulls her out and she's like, I'm okay. And I'm like, wait, no, this can't possibly
be. And then that's it. They literally show up and go whew, that was a close one.
And then they show up in a cab. The next scene, they're showing up in a cab.
That's it. Nothing.
I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. We waited How long did we wait to see that?
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, oh man.
And that like is a representation of everything that's wrong with the show. And by the way, I had written all these other alternative ways that could go that I think would be better once again. And if I can come up with something better, these people who do this professionally should come up with something better. But I was thinking, imagine the families all escaping with this. And they were going to like, they're literally saying like, okay, we're ready to, you know, we got one more week and we're out of this and we're going to go like start our new lives in Chicago or whatever. And imagine that all of a sudden, like Wendy's part of the deal and now she's in the hospital and now how are we going to make this thing work? Or the kids are injured and he has a chance to make a break for it. It goes like, what is he going to do? Is he going to save himself? Is he going to save his family? Like there's all these interesting things that could have been put up there. And they're just like, no, they hop in the cab and they go home. I'm like, why did you even put that in there? Like, what is the point of any of that? Like,
there was no point to that. That was frustrating. One of the other things I thought too was at the end, I thought that you were going to maybe see like a shootout at the gala.
Right.
Because I'm like, okay, this is going to end. Then I'm thinking, all right, this is it. This is the big night. Like something huge is going to happen here. Like, you know, Navarro's going to get it. He's going to escape, figure out what happened, and he's going to shoot everybody up. And because you had all the big wigs and everybody from the prior seasons are there, you know, whoever's left, and nothing happened. You know, Camilla just comes up and she's like, I'm going to kill Ruth. And if you do anything, I'm going to kill your kids. I wish Ruth had made it out.
And the other thing I always think about when I get to the end of a show, I always kind of try to say like, well, what was the point of the show? What was this show trying to say this whole entire time? And, you know, they really smack you in the head with it there at the very end of that last episode that, you know, it's about this like white privilege and these kind of entitled people who just feel like they can do whatever the hell they want to do and get away with it. And then Wendy even says it. She goes, well, that's what always happens. So I think that's what the show is trying to say, but I don't really think they did a very good job of saying it. And also it just feels like it's just so contrived over the course of the show, because to your point, in that very first episode where, you know, he is desperately like begging for his life and you really feel it. It's like such a great episode. Those first two episodes, by the way, which directed by Jason Bateman. Great job directing those.
He directed
episodes.
Those?
Yeah. Great job.
Wow. I didn't know that.
And he did really exceptional work. You know, you think about those scenes, and then you think about those scenes in the first season where he's literally contemplating killing himself, committing suicide to like let his family off the hook. And I'm like, where are those characters now at this point in the show? Even if we take it for granted that the show is trying to make a point about this, that I still feel like, come on, give me a break. These people are savvy drug dealers. They run $100 million empire or something. And we're supposed to believe that everything these people say to these people, they believe what they're telling them, even though like literally Ruth will be like, don't listen to these people. They'll lie to you every second. And then Navarro says to Camilla, don't listen to a goddamn word these people say. They're all liars. And then even they tell him, hey, we got you covered. We're going to take care of you. And he's like, okay, I'm on board. It's just like, it's like, it's so crazy. All they do is lie to people. All they do is stab them in the back. Everybody warns the next person in this chain of dominoes, don't trust them. They're going to stab you in the back. They get stabbed in the back. And then they just keep floating through this. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? It's just so preposterous. And what I thought would be kind of interesting would be, imagine this whole house of cards collapses and basically everybody else that they screwed over ends up better off. Like, you know, Camilla ends up taking over this crime syndicate. Ruth ends up becoming this giant heroin dealer. That would be, for me, that would be very satisfying, that these horrible, horrible people were doing nothing but being selfish for themselves. And in the end, these people that they betrayed all ended up in better positions and they end up like murdered at the end, which I was really rooting for, by the way.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be more satisfying to me. I know people are still rooting for the birds. I was not rooting for the birds.
No, I wasn't. I was rooting for Marty. I wasn't rooting. I was really, really looking forward to seeing
Ruth.
Wendy.
I was rooting for Ruth more than
I was rooting for Marty and Ruth. Actually, I was really hoping Wendy would bite it. It's almost like they wrote the first season, then they wrote the second season, then they wrote the third. I'm like, all right, well, we need to wrap it up. And so it wasn't as like smooth and sort of well thought out. I kind of feel like when you've got a show like this, you almost have to write it as if, you know, you've got to write it into 3 segments or 4 segments and have an ending when you're starting to know where you want to end up. And that may not have been where they wanted to get to, or they may not have had any idea where they were getting to.
Or you could do something like, you know, the analogy is Breaking Bad and the MCU, by the way, also. Because Breaking Bad was written this way where, Aaron Paul just get killed off like right away. They literally went from season to season, and they would like look at the previous season and go, what can we get from there? We can retroactively turn season 1 into an Easter egg for season 2, for season 3, for season 4. And then we get to like, now you're in Better Call Saul at this point, and you're like going like, oh my God, they're planting seeds for things that aren't going to pay off until Breaking Bad, right? Because they're thinking about all these things. To your point, I feel like when you look at Ozark, it really feels like they're just trying to write to the next 5 episodes, next 6 episodes. And I think the car crash is a perfect example of this. I think they put that at the beginning of the episode. They had some general plan for where that was going to go, and they abandoned ship. They're like, oh man, we're at the end of the show. We'll just have them take a cab home. Like, what? Whoa, like you've really just given up at this point, haven't you?
My God, it's true. So true.
Oh, and one quick recommendation for you. I think I've already recommended this for you, but I definitely, if you're a fan of The Wire, you should. Now I'm 3 episodes into this. 3. There's only 3 episodes out. We own this city.
We own this city. I've heard about that, and I got to check it out. The only thing I'm upset about this is it's not in the same universe as The Wire. I was like, when I saw it, I'm like, holy shit. I'm like, we might see some characters, and I know some of the actors are back, but they play different parts. And I was like, oh my God, how amazing would that have been though if it was like in the same universe and like McNulty shows up for a scene or something? I would be like, oh my God, like,
This is based on a true story, and it's interesting. The characters, the police officers that were arrested are, they use their names, so it's not fictionalized the way some shows that are, like for example, Tokyo Vice, which I just saw. That is almost everything that happens in that show is right out of the memoir. It's a beat for beat, but like everybody's name has been changed. So so that gives them like leeway to fictionalize a lot of the things. Everybody's name in We Own the City is the actual person's name, and the dates all line up. It's like very journalistic, like The Wire, but this is nonfiction. So they really couldn't do what you're describing, but you get like you said, you get some of that because a lot of the cast member from, so it's a spiritual sequel, if nothing else. And things are still very bad in Baltimore all these years later.
Yeah, I definitely got to check it out. Definitely got to check it out. All right, cool. Thanks for the conversation. All right, man. It's good talking with you, Vic. Good talking to you too. All right, man. Talk to you. Bye.